Hello, today I'll be showcasing or reviewing the organelles of a plant cell. So just like how we humans have organs that keep us alive and functioning, plants also have their type of organs that keep them alive and functioning. Those organs are actually called organelles. Note that most plant cells have these organelles, but organelles may vary between plant species. These organelles include the cell wall, the cell membrane, chloroplasts, cytoplasm, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth, Golgi apparatus, nucleus, mitochondria, and vacuoles. Let's move on to the cell wall. First, we have the cell wall, which is represented by this foam that was painted green that encases the contents of the cell. I'll give you a look at it. Okay, the cell wall is a rigid outer layer that goes around the cell, or you could say encases the cell. The cell wall is made of a material called cellulose, and its job is to protect, defend, and hold the structure of the plant cell. The cell wall is also semi-permeable, meaning that it lets certain substances inside the cell, but keeps certain substances out. For example, O2 and H2O, oxygen and water. Those two substances can go through the cell wall, but certain substances that are not beneficial to the cell, or substances that harm the cell, are not allowed inside. You can also say it's selectively permeable, and semi-permeable and selectively permeable are interchangeable. In summary, the cell wall protects the cell, defends the cell, and holds the cell structure. Let's move on to the cell membrane. Next up, we have the cell membrane, represented by this plastic wrap that surrounds the cell. Now, the cell membrane is a flexible, malleable barrier that encases the cell and sits right behind the cell wall. Its job is to allow or deny entry to any molecules trying to enter or exit the cell. Now, just like the cell wall, the cell membrane is semi-permeable or selectively permeable, meaning that, again, letting certain substances inside the cell, like O2 and H2O, letting them inside the cell, but keeping toxic substances outside the cell. Now, bigger particles like glucose can still enter the cell, but take a different way through protein channels in the cell membrane. So it's represented by this plastic wrap here and here. You can think of a water balloon, how it encases the water, just like how the cell membrane encases the contents of the cell. In summary, it encases the contents of the cell. Also, it protects the contents of the cell by acting as a sort of barrier, and monitors what goes in and out of the cell. Next, let's move on to chloroplasts. Next up, we have chloroplasts, which are these green organelles that are right under the vacuole, as you can see here. Now, the job of the chloroplasts is to take energy from the sun using photosynthesis, which is where photosynthesis takes place in most plants, is right where the chloroplasts are. And they absorb energy from the sun using something called chlorophyll. And chlorophyll absorbs the energy from the sun, like I said, and turns the energy from the sun into energy the plant can use for essentially anything in the cell. Right there, right under the vacuoles. In summary, chloroplasts take energy from the sun and convert it into energy the plant can use. Next, let's move on to the cytoplasm. So now, we're at the cytoplasm. Now, the cytoplasm is represented by the crumpled up plastic wrap that is underneath all of the organelles. Now, the cytoplasm is a gray, jelly-like viscous fluid that is what most of the cell consists of and fills the space in between the nucleus and the cell membrane. The cytoplasm is what most of the organelles flow in, all of the organelles flow in, and it carries around nutrients to the organelles that need it. In summary, the cytoplasm is what most of the organelles flow in, all of the organelles flow in, and it carries nutrients and any other materials that the organelles need to them. Now, let's move on to the cytoskeleton. Next up, we have the cytoskeleton. Now, you can't really see it, but if you can look right here, you can see a tube-like structure running through the cytoplasm. Now you might ask, what is that tube structure? That tube structure is the cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton's job is to support the cell from the inside of the cytoplasm. Kind of like the cell wall and the cell membrane. So its first job is to support the cell from the inside, and its second job is organelles use the cytoplasm as sort of paths to travel on. You can see right there. Also right there. In summary, they support the cell from the inside of the cytoplasm, and organelles use these structures as paths to travel on. Next up, we have ribosomes. Now, here, these black, grain-like structures are called ribosomes. You can see right here. That's one. There's also another one right here. And right there. Ribosomes are grain-like structures that assemble and store proteins that the cell needs. Some ribosomes float freely in the cytoplasm. However, some dot a certain part of the endoplasmic reticulum, which are these organelles right here. In summary, they assemble and store proteins for the cell. Now, let's move on to the endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth. Now, we're here at the endoplasmic reticulum, or I'll call it ER, the ER for ease of speech. So, which are these organelles? Not including the oval-shaped organelle, which I'll get into in a bit. Just these purple organelles here. And red organelle there. Or red structure. The ER plays an important role in processing, producing, and transporting proteins and lipids, which are important building blocks for cell growth, or just important building blocks in general for the cell. Now there's two parts of the endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth. Now you may ask, why are they dubbed rough and smooth? Well, the reason being is because the rough endoplasmic reticulum contains ribosomes, which makes it rough, and the smooth ER contains no ribosomes, which makes it smooth. In summary, the ER plays a massive role in processing, producing, and transporting proteins and fats, which are important building blocks for cell growth. Now, let's move on to the nucleus. So now, we're at the oval-shaped structure I was talking about just a few seconds before we got to the nucleus, which is this structure right here, nucleus. Now, the nucleus is one of the largest structures in the plant cell, or many cells alike, and it contains the genetic material, which are instructions or the blueprint for cell growth and the making of proteins. Now, surrounding the nucleus, I don't know if you can see it, but I put a layer around the nucleus, is something called the nuclear envelope. The nuclear envelope just helps hold the nucleus together, and there are pores in the nuclear envelope which materials pass through to give materials to the nucleus. And if you go even deeper into the nucleus, I don't know if you can see it, but I made a hole there. You can't see it very well, I'm sorry about that. But in the middle of the nucleus is a dark, oval-like structure that is called the nucleolus, and it contains RNA and also creates ribosomes that make proteins for the cell. So there's the nucleus right there. Now, let's move on to the Golgi apparatus. Now we're at the Golgi apparatus. This organelle right here. The Golgi apparatus, its job is to take newly manufactured or produced materials from the ER, or endoplasmic reticulum, and distributes them either inside the cell to other organelles or places outside of the cell. Right there. In summary, this organelle, the Golgi apparatus, takes newly made materials from the ER and distributes them around the cell, from the inside of the cell, or places outside of the cell. Now, let's move on to mitochondria. Mitochondria are these structures in the cell. Now, mitochondria takes energy from food that the cell takes in and converts the energy from the food into energy the cell can use. And that energy is in the form of ATP. Or you could just say energy for simplicity. In summary, mitochondria converts energy from food into energy the cell can use for daily function and for staying alive. Now, let's move on to the last organelle, vacuoles. Now, in animal cells, vacuoles usually the animal cells usually have several vacuoles, while matured plant cells usually have just one large vacuole, which is this organelle right here. Another big organelle. Now, the vacuole is sort of like a storage system. It stores anything that the cell needs, varying from food, water, waste until it is ready for elimination. And anything that the cell needs is kept inside there. In summary, it stores materials that the cell needs, such as food, water, and waste until it is eliminated. And those are just a few that the vacuoles keep. As you can see, plant cells, and all cells for that matter, are very intricate things that have a lot of functioning pieces to be formed into a functioning thing. Now, I'll be showcasing the parts I used to make this model. So, for the cell wall, I used foam, like a big foam sheet, like 30 inches by 20 inches, and just cut it into 3 by 6 pieces, forming a hexagon, and painted it green. After that, the cell membrane I made with saran wrap. I just surrounded the cell wall, or sort of just put it next to the cell wall, behind it. And chloroplasts, I made out of just styrofoam and cut foam circles that I painted green. Then the cytoplasm was just crumpled up saran wrap or plastic wrap, whatever you want to call it. And I just stuffed it before I put all of the organelles in. And then the cytoskeleton was just made out of cut straws. If you remember those long tube-like structures that I was talking about earlier. And then, let's move on to the vacuole. The vacuole I also made out of the same material that the cell wall was made out of, just foam, and I cut it into the shape of a vacuole. Then the ribosomes, I had like fake sea grapes lying around, like fake food kind of that you would put in the baskets, and I just took them, painted them black, and hot glued them. And mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, rough and smooth, were all made out of pipe cleaners, just shaped in a way that made it look like the models that I saw online. And the nucleus was just made out of circular packing peanuts that I cut. Cell membrane was made, or the nuclear envelope was also made out of styrofoam. Mostly all the nucleus was made out of styrofoam, actually. And the labels were made out of just toothpicks and paper that I stuck in the model. And everything was held together with hot glue. Same with the base. Thank you for watching this video, and that is my cell model project. Peace out.